Good morning, everybody. My name is Matthew Niederhauser. I'm an artist and also the managing director of Onassis Onyx, the Onassis Foundation's digital platform for the development and presentation of new media artworks and immersive experiences. But I'm here this morning to speed run you through 3 or 4 projects that I have been working on with Marc Costa, which have really been exploring the new affordances of machine learning tools and integrating them into projects in order to create interactive installations. I'm sort of going to start from the beginning. It's a little funny now because even projects that were made in 2023 feel like, oh, they're so 2023 in terms of the pace at which this technology is improving and their outputs, but also sort of gives a sense of the genesis of where I'm coming from. One of the first, personally speaking, I've been interacting with AI since the 90s. In high school, I used to program in Lisp, a recursive programming language that did very simple neural networks. I unfortunately was diverted from math into anthropology in college because that's where all the cool kids were, but it was also a more interesting time for me. This is a commission from the Onassis Foundation called Ekphrasis, where we were sort of taking, this is when GPT was first coming out, and especially Stable Diffusion, some of the first really capable open source tools, and trying to unleash it on poetry, probably one of the hardest things that even machine learning models and large language models have to deal with. Can it interpret it? Can it in some ways visualize it automatically based off the poetry of C.P. Cavafy? And we had excellent access to his original archives, and essentially we're trying to think about how we could write a single line of code that, based off of a voiceover, would take the poem apart, create automatic prompting, and visualize it using Stable Diffusion. The results were not great. But at the same time was sort of exposing the underpinnings of sort of the edges of these capabilities, which we like to think of as potentially, society-stopping intelligence, which might still happen. There's time for that type of speculation. But this was really our first endeavor in terms of trying to really take apart what are the capabilities of the technology and sort of playing with it in a way of trying to analyze what we consider the sort of the edges of language and some of the things that AI still has a very hard capability of engaging with. I would say poetry and humor in particular. This led to some other experimentations where we got sort of more excited about the interactive potential of AI and its affordances. This is almost a sculptural piece called Parallels. It is essentially creating a window into a machine vision world by, quite frankly, in some ways thinking of it as creating a very large camera. It's an LED wall with a camera situated behind it that every 2 seconds pulls from the live view and reinterprets it live using a custom Stable Diffusion model. In this sense, all of the prompting that it's pulling from is based off of research of local art histories, aesthetics. This is its first presentation at Plasmata 2, an exhibition in Ioannina, Greece. Also became a moment, I feel, for people to see the technology embedded in a natural landscape. And once again, not trying to create perfect final pixel images, but in a way like gives people pause, think about how the technology is working, interacting, and how it's trying to interpret the world in many ways. This has been a really fun one in terms of taking it into different architectural and natural landscapes, and redefining it, making it site-specific every single time. It's a very simple mechanism in which you're allowing a public to interact with the technology in a way that hopefully gives them pause, think how it's working, and hopefully elicit a little bit of joy at the same time. It got a lot more complicated not complicated, but we started to really lean into especially the narrative potentials, or creating what we sometimes call a narrative engine, which is essentially using user input within like a stack of scripting to automatically create generative text. It's in some ways resembles what we call a chatbot. Once again, this is so 2023, but at the time when we showed this at the Venice Film Festival, it felt like planting a little bit of ground and trying to show the direction that the way we consume media is probably going to become extremely personalized soon. Our ability to maybe insert ourselves into a Netflix show, to consume news that is tailored to individuals based off of your reading habits, or even getting podcasts that are personalized. I think that personalization and having that automatically driven through large language models is something that's going to become more prevalent. So Tulpamancer was this machine learning VR installation that essentially created a custom VR experience for you based off of a short text-based interaction. The idea of a tulpa actually comes from the Tibetan Book of the Dead. It was a mind-created entity that through intense concentration or meditation that you could externalize, essentially a form or an entity that you could talk to. I feel in a very strange way that large language models are similar, a huge amount of computational power put into something that you can talk to but isn't quite human and still has this uncanny flavor. Especially through my co-creator Marc Costa, also went on a very long bent with Annie Besant, who is a co-founder of the Theosophical Society, which was in the 1920s, this reaction in many ways to the advent of world-changing technologies like radio, telegraph, railways. Quite frankly, one of the larger shifts in how society works and its technology. What was very amazing about that time, especially the idea of seances and transmissions and clairvoyance actually borrowed from the language of technology, like channeling, like TV channels. I mean, it's this very strange, interesting world. But she also had this idea called thought forms, the ability or thinking that thoughts could manifest themselves as entities outside of you. So should have been clicking through on those. These are some very cool things from Annie Besant. So the installation, actually, we gutted a 1980s compact computer, and you'd sit down and have this, what felt like an innocuous, almost chatbot type interaction. It's actually very personal questions. It was stated up front very clearly that the data was going to be destroyed at the end in order to sort of, and it is, and all of the models are sort of like local. But based off of that in the background, once you're 2 questions in, it starts generating automatically an entire script and then pulls the script apart, creates rectangular imagery, depth maps, sends it all into Unity where it's scripted again and sort of creates a custom VR experience. So even at the end of your 10 minutes and it tells you to put on the headset, you sort of pull it on, and it's maybe not even done generating the VR experience before you start it. This is from an installation at the Phi Center. It sort of had this great sort of set. Very big props to the Phi Center in Montreal for helping us create like this world around the installation. And would based off of these answers, you would immediately have this, an entire VR experience that was built for you, and in response to all these like very sort of personalized questions about your past, your future, and even your fate. And it would delete itself immediately after. And you were sort of the only person to experience it. We would also sort of print out a final message. Once again, this is part of this huge scripting stack that would sort of be handed over to you, and so you'd only have this like one physical letter that was like left. And the last thing I'll just quickly dive into was a project called the Golden Key. I mean, the Tulpamancer was a very personal experience. Once again, the trap of creating something that with one setup only 12 people can experience in a single day. Not amazing for distribution, but still an important experiment for us. And we came up with this project called the Golden Key that was first shown at South by Southwest in 2024. And it's essentially a myth-making machine. And it's a system that would continually create folk tales every 2 to 3 minutes based off of something called the ATU index, the Arne Thompson Utter index, which was this academic index that tried to catalog the history of narrative and mythological motifs, almost in the same way that Darwin tried to create a genealogy of animals. These people sat down and tried to look at the history of narrative. It's pretty wild going into the ATU index. You realize how deep certain narrative structures and tropes have existed for millennia, how they speak to us now, how they are constantly now reprocessed through all of our lovely streaming services. But the themes are very sort of like, you see these really common, interesting themes. This is one of our favorite graphs, the intensity of fish-related motifs in a group's oral tradition. It gets very granular. But the system itself would essentially draw from 3 entries into the ATU index, and then also take live input from the audience, who could put in whatever story elements they wanted to see appear at the same time. So it was combining live a history of folklore narrative with the live input of audience members. And within 2 to 3 minutes, you'd see how your input would evolve within it. And, once again, I feel, we're living in this very large paradigm shift where our sort of oral or book or TV traditions usually would come from human-to-human transmission, or we'd filter it through ourselves, but there's just an exponentially large amount of our writing is now being filtered through large language models, just flat out. I'm not saying it's a good thing or a bad thing, but a lot of our textual output is now, whether we like it or not, going through large language models. I use it a lot of people use it a lot, and it's going to become more prevalent, let alone is there any college students in here? How many of you wrote your essays with ChatGPT? Tell us now. I mean, once again, I'm not here to judge, but this does represent a change in our transmission of storytelling. These are a few installations at the Phi Center again, in that meet in Milan. But, once again, the stories aren't perfect either. We're not trying, you see, especially when you listen to these stories that happen every 2 or 3 minutes, they're trying to find or create moral conflict. How they resolve it isn't always correct. Once again, it's allowing an audience to interact with the technology, see how it's reacting to them within a larger public setting, but also seeing where it fails, Same thing with Tulpamancer. Some people would come out extremely moved by it. Some people would come out being like, it didn't get me at all, and that's fine. But, all of these are explorations in a way that we can try to sort of let a public interact with the technology, see how it's trying to analyze and interpret them, whether through visually or through textual sort of like engagement, and potentially make them think about how this is going to be starting to be prevalent everywhere. This is stuff we've worked over the past few years. Right now, we're diving into some new projects using open source video gen tools. That has changed dramatically in the past 3 or 4 months in terms of the quality, especially of open source tools, let alone what's coming out of Google, what's coming out of OpenAI. It's a really wild time for video generation. So once again, I am thinking about how can they not just be used for, like, I'm going to create final pixel for a video or an image, but how can they be used for an automated interactive systems and for personalized storytelling, which I think is going to become a more prominent use in terms of how we engage with and consume media. Thank you for your time, and I'll be here this afternoon.